Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. This is Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast. Tuning in live from New York. I'm Dayal Gurunga here with the Acyuta Gopi. Our normal co-host and friend Kishore Chandra is not with us this morning, but we love him and we love all of you. And thank you to our live virtual studio audience who's tuning in live. We have a live audience here tuning in through our Rise platform from all over the world. We got Canada, we got Brazil, we got the West Coast, we got Texas, we got the Philippines, we've got Queens, we've got India, we've got it all. We got the Midwest. Anywhere else I didn't get? I think I got everybody, most everybody. Jeff, are you in Ohio? Is that right? Are you in Jersey? Where's Jeff? Okay, he's typing. I see him typing. He's in Philly.
Wow.
Wow, Philly. He's
None
like,
of it.
I'm next door. Um, and so, and glad to have you all here. How you doing, Achuta? What's going on in your world? How was your weekend?
I'm good. My weekend was nice. I felt like, you ever feel like, oh, you need a family powwow, catch up with people, make sure everybody's
Yeah.
still good, everybody's still handling it. It was one of those weekends, so it was nice.
How is
Super
everybody?
nice.
Anybody going off the rails? Anyone we should be concerned about?
Thankfully, no. Everybody, we're all pretty good. We're on the we're on the path.
Yeah. I spoke to your brother yesterday at length. He called me.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it was the first time they ever called me. And he messaged me about something and then he was like, "Let's talk." And I was like, "I'm free now." And he's like, "Okay." And we spoke and it was very similar to kind of like the conversation we had related to this podcast and how we're structuring it, et cetera, and just his um, desired inspiration to have in-depth, meaningful conversations around things that we normally don't. Normally, when you have like spiritual or philosophical debates, it's like proving one point over the other or trying to exert dominion in terms of like which is right and etc. And he was saying how interesting and cool it would be for conversations of people with different viewpoints and opinions coming to a place and not like we have this idea of like interfaith where everyone comes together and appreciates each other, but like there are people who outside of like interfaith, you think of interfaith like a Muslim representative and a Hindu representative and a Christian representative, but like there are so many thought leaders out there, so to speak, that don't consider them part of any faith. They're
Hmm.
just thought people. Maybe they're proclaimed atheists or maybe they're proclaimed agnostics or whatever it may be, but like they have thoughts about the world or how life works, etc. And he was just talking about wanting to kind of create forums and dialogues for great conversations to take place. He was giving an example of Ricky Gervais, and
Yep.
he was listening. I was like, I want to. It's like we determine our goals. We want to bring Ricky Gervais to the Bhakti Center. I want to have a conversation with Anant and Ricky Gervais on the second floor yoga studio and do a little
That
kirtan.
that would be pretty cool. Yeah, so and I was telling him also because we also had a conversation about that, and I was telling him just how brave I think it is when you go into other spaces with just a view to just kind of hear them out and
Mm,
understand where they're coming from as people. um Beyond the fields of like my philosophy is right and your philosophy is wrong, and now it is my chosen duty to try and save you from yourself. Just a view to hear from other people as other beings who are living, thinking, contemplating, questioning, and just
yeah,
see where they are instead of trying to fix them immediately.
yeah,
And I think that it's a kind of really cool new model to look at, as like bhakti practitioners. Like, here's
mm.
an idea. How about we go out and we don't try to convert anybody immediately? Like,
Well, what I, as you were just thinking also just now, is that as spiritual practitioners, when we think about our philosophy of life and the conversations we engage with other people, and you mentioned this idea of like needing to save people from themselves, and I think it's a curious question to reflect of like how much of my sharing of spiritual life or sharing my lifestyle with others is in a mood of wanting to genuinely help other people or validate something for myself that what I'm doing is right or okay. And I think there's it's usually always some mix. When we try to
Yep.
determine one over the other, it's never like left and right, that side of the scale. Um, but I think that it behooves us to really like, where do I like, am I trying to sometimes convince somebody of something else because unless I get other people to look at what I'm doing and validate what I'm doing, I question it myself. And I need other people to get on board in order for me to feel okay about what I'm doing. And then it becomes actually my wanting to help people is actually much more about me than it is about anybody else. And it gets a little funky.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, if you look at a, an atheist per se, and their goal is really just to help people. They see people are suffering, they see that there's homelessness and there's a lack of connection. There's all these things. And they set up all of the best resources to help those people.
Yeah.
And sure, they might actually believe in a higher power. And Anand and I were talking about this. But sometimes what happens is it's like the way other people push a certain higher power on people. They're like, yeah, I don't ascribe to that. And since I can't find what I ascribe to yet because of the way that everybody else has been pushing it on
Mm,
me, maybe I ascribe to nothing. But they're such a true, authentic, sincere human being. And I think that that's worth looking at,
mm,
which, kind of still crosses over into our conversation from last week of like cancel culture. If you just cancel someone
mm.
without hearing maybe the full thing, and sure, your opinion might not change after hearing out the whole thing. But having heard out the whole thing, what have you lost?
Yeah. I read this book once by Richard Rohr. You ever read Richard Rohr? Know Richard Rohr?
Mm-mm.
Rohr. He's a Franciscan, lives out in New Mexico, Arizona, out there, and brilliant, brilliant author. And he wrote that book Falling Upward, which is a recent kind of classic about
Mm.
spiritual maturity. And he wrote another book called he speaks a lot from the teachings of Saint Francis, and he wrote this book called Eager to Love. And it was almost on like that idea of cancel culture, and it sort of it spoke to this post that I put on the Bhakti Center's platform recently, that like if we're not sure where somebody fits in our spiritual community, we may need to expand or reassess our understanding of spiritual community. Like
Mm.
this sense of like, if there's not a place for someone to belong, and we need to use discernment. It doesn't mean that just like, if like I was thinking about this at the Bhakti Center the other day, because I had to ask somebody to leave because they were
Mm.
they were causing a significant disturbance, and it was almost like yeah, a fear of them actually harming somebody else. And so I was like, okay, well, am I going against that principle? And I'm like, no, you can still belong in a community, have a place for dialogue, but maybe in this particular context, you need to be removed or take a step out because of the general norms of social interaction, that aren't taking place. And I really don't do that often. But generally, if somebody, there are liabilities and concerns if someone's going to harm another person. And so, but wherever it may be on at different places, but this idea of that there is no spiritual, there can never be a spiritual cancel culture. Like our supreme best friend, God, higher power, divinity, never cancels anybody. It just can't happen. And that's Richard Rohr's book Eager to Love. It's like we may, and in our likeness of divine higher spirit, in our pursuit of becoming more godly or spiritual, then there becomes this place where can we ever fully turn a blind eye to anyone? Like maybe we realize because we're not God, we have a limited capacity in terms of, and because I think that's also a big part of it. Like it's a humbling thing, but also liberating and powerful thing is that I'm not God. I'm not your God. I can't play the role of God. I'm not going to complete you. I'm not your rock. I'm not your unending. If I was your unending source of support, if I always lifted you up, If I filled your cup and completely made you feel safe and secure and connected all the time, I'd be God. You wouldn't need, like, you would just need me. You don't need God. You just need me. And that's why Romeo and Juliet, I quote often, she said, "You are the God of my idolatry." Meaning that, like, this idea of like Romeo and Juliet, you complete me. All I need is you. And it's like, no, that's not true, sister, brother. Sorry, because if that was true, there would be no God. That would be, we're trying to get other people to play God in our lives. And so for us to recognize that limited capacity, and it's so beautiful, when we look at even in Vedic literatures, the story of Dhruva Maharaj, when Dhruva Maharaj was hurt by his father and his mother, we say his stepmother, but it was like a mother. And, um, and then he went for shelter and he was like, you got to go find Vishnu. Like, you got to go find God. Like, I'm limited to soothe your wounds. And so I think that, it doesn't mean finding a place for everyone in spiritual culture means that we therefore go out and play God for everybody, and we can't play that role. But it means, at least conceptually, spiritually, in our heart, nobody can be condemned forever. Nobody can be like exited from the game, so to speak, permanently. And how are we constantly finding ways to bring people in, to build relational bridges, and recognize that everybody is on their spiritual journey. They just may be in a different context, different place than me. And so I think that when you mentioned cancel culture in the context of this conversation, that's what I thought of.
Yeah, and it does happen a lot. And like you said, we have to know what people's roles are as
Yes.
limited, like as limited living entities. We have to understand what people's roles are. There are some people I'm like, well, I don't go to them for medical advice. They're not a doctor. They're just they're just my friend. So, we have to consider the source, and we have to consider what people's actual roles are.
Yeah.
And I
Medical
think
advice,
that
very apropos in today's scenario.
right, yeah, I feel like today people have kind of lost that sense of discrimination where it's like, well, I don't really trust that doctor, so I don't trust any doctors. So now let me trust this random dude. It's like, but they didn't even try to go to school for that. Like, what's happening? And so it's the same thing where we misappropriate when we start putting those
Mm,
emotions in the wrong place, even spiritually. And we'll see it. People go to spiritual teachers for things that spiritual teachers should not be equipped for. Like, this
mm,
person is your spiritual advisor. They're there for the hurdles and the things that you have spiritually. And then you get people and they're like, but my marriage isn't working. It's like, you need a marriage counselor. You see? It's different. Like, the spiritual teacher spent years and years and years studying how to get you out of this spiritual quagmire that you're in. The marriage counselor did the due diligence of going and studying for that. Like, we have to really separate those things, and we have to do them with our relationships with each other. And so if I'm in a spiritual community, really behooves me to look at the people and say, okay, do they vibe with my spiritual thought processes? Then
mm.
sometimes you hear some things on the other side and you're like, I don't agree with that person with that. Okay, but do they still align with my spiritual thought processes? Then that's where we can get down. Cool.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have levels. It's okay to have layers. It's okay to have stratas in your own personal society. I think in a way of trying to make everyone equal at heart, it becomes an all or nothing. And I read something and they said one of the most important things that their spiritual teacher had them do was separate the baby from the bathwater.
Hmm.
So that saying, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I thought it was
Hmm.
really cool to take that kind of analogy and really
Mm,
kind of separate those two. Like, what are the core principles here? And then what are all the details around it
yeah.
that can shift and change, and most probably will need to shift and change as society and the world shifts and changes.
Mm,
But what are the core values? What are those real core principles at heart that we want to keep? So I think when
yeah.
we look at each other in spiritual relationships, and when we look at other people, we really have to look at what are the core, why am I actually going to this person? Why am I interacting
Mm,
with this person? Why am I allowing this person's energy into my life? What's the
Yeah.
reason for it? And then really remember that reason, and that not everybody can fill our unlimited soul desires except for an
Yeah.
unlimited supreme person.
Yeah. When you talked about you need a marriage counselor or this counselor, I remember before I got married and I was, Rasika and I, my wife and I were planning to get married and we went to Radhanath Swami to ask him just like some questions and advice and like, are we going down the right path and everything? And he said he was in his own humble way, he was like, I don't know why people keep coming to me with this. Is I've never been married. And then he said something really sweet. He said, "But I really care about I really care about people." And he said, "When you care about people, Krishna empowers you with an understanding how to help them." And so he said, "This is just what I share." And he gave some nice advice and some words. But he was like, "I don't know why people keep coming to me to. I've never been married."
Right? Yeah,
And then
it's a very interesting thing.
yeah, and then I was also thinking about how you were sharing about appreciating people. There was this. I'll give a context, an example, but the point relates to what you were just saying. There was once this way back in the '90s, Ravinder Swarup Prabhu gave this seminar series called "Cure of Souls." Did you ever listen to it? Cure of Souls.
Mm.
And it's powerful. Um, I've been talking with Kula Pradeep, one of to ask him if like he would update it, like because it's been 20, 30 years, since he gave that seminar series. But it really is about cure of souls means like the care of souls, the care of souls, and it's about like pastoral care in spiritual communities. And he was using this uh, author who went through these various experiences from another faith tradition, who wasn't like a Gaudiya Vaishnava, wasn't a card carrying Hare Krishna, I'll tell you that much. And and some of the people in the classroom were like, well, why can't we just pull from our own like tradition in terms of like finding answers? Like, isn't everything here? And he said, like, why can't we just appreciate this person for what he's done? This idea of like, okay, there are people who may not necessarily share every one of our spiritual values. Or they may share spiritual values but express them in a different way. Or they may even be like, let's say I'm a spiritualist and someone else is an atheist, but they may have a developed sense of knowledge in a certain area, whether it's in marriage and relationships, whether it's in health and physical well-being, whether it's in, whatever it may be. And I think sometimes we lose out when we immediately discredit people and cut off the chance for conversation to learn and take in information from people who may be experts in certain fields, um, that, you know, as you talking about somebody who may actually be very evolved in a particular area, but we discredit them immediately because it's like we put, there was a Swami or somebody who's given a class once and he was talking about this example when somebody asked a question in a lecture. It was like it was a very intelligent question, but it was almost kind of a challenging question, but it was like a sincere, intelligent question. The speaker was just like, do you eat meat? In this way of just like, you're not even qualified to ask a question, and it was just like, geez Louise, you know what I mean? Like, we kind of like find ways to find fault with people rather than just like really appreciating the wealth of knowledge they may have in a particular area. And when we do that, I really feel like everybody wins and we all kind of evolve together. So I was just kind of like finding ways to appreciate. And it was interesting. Jeff put in the comment here. He said, maybe if you separate the baby from the bathwater, you don't need to throw out either. You realize and appreciate the value. And so, anyways, those are some things coming to my mind.
Yeah. And I think, when we miss out on that chance for conversation,
Mm,
we also miss out on somebody's why. Ever,
mm,
like it's like we never stop to ask an atheist why. It's always just like, oh, me spiritualist, you atheist, let's hurl abuses at each other. Like, what at what point do we stop as compassionate people, which spiritualists are supposed to be, and say, well, what's the story there? Like, the same way we ask people, oh, how did you get involved in spirituality? How did you come to Krishna consciousness? Well, it's like, I'm an atheist. Well, how'd you come to that realization? What happened for you? Because you're
Hmm.
giving your devotion, your worship, your time somewhere. So now if you've
Yeah.
chosen to put it, what are you putting it into? As a genuine trying to understand someone's story. We're not
Hmm.
just one dimensional cut out pieces of paper with one label on us. That label
Hmm.
came about because of a story. Maybe they were hurt. Maybe they were fed up. Maybe somebody tried too hard. Maybe this is a different approach. And Radhanath Swami
Yeah.
is such a wonderful example of really giving a philosophy in a certain way.
Yeah.
And he's the type of person, he's like, just be friends first. Just be friends with them.
Yeah.
Whoever it is. If you have a problem, his first advice, he's like, just be friends with them. Don't try to sway them. Don't try to force them. Just be friends. And
Yeah.
in order for us to do that, we have to venture out and hear out somebody's why. And
Yeah.
asking somebody genuinely why is such a big thing. Nobody asks anybody. Nobody's like, how are you actually? Everybody's still on the road. We good? Anybody freaking out? No. But how are we actually? And it's
Mm.
like, oh, I'm an atheist. Or, oh no, I couldn't do that. I'm totally on meat. And I'm like, well, what happened? Like, how'd you get there?
Yeah. I was thinking how I love the idea of knowing people's stories and labels. And from what you were saying just now, because we love stories and we love to, but we sometimes create our own stories without taking the time to get somebody else. It's almost like I'd rather put you in my own story version of who you are than take the time to get to know yours actually. And are a way of, labels in some ways are an excuse not to get to know someone's story. Because when I say the word atheist, when I say the word Christian, when I say the word whatever it may be, when I say the word, I don't know, those are the only two words that came to my mind. When I say a word of what somebody is, it immediately creates a story around you based on my understanding of what that is, rather than let me put the label aside and take the time to know your story. And so I would, it's people all the time, who are you? What are you? What's your religion? What do you believe? What are you? And it's just like, do I need to answer that question? People will say sometimes it's like, why are you afraid to just say that you're Hindu? And I'm like, because I don't even know if you and I would share the same understanding of that word. Like if I say that, do you have the same like are we talking about the same thing? You know? And so I think that we are so eager to put labels on people. They're divorced, they are whatever it may, what, just single, whatever it may be. We put a label on people because we don't want to take the time. They're depressed. We look at mental health. It's like, I need a name for what I am. I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm bipolar, I'm what is that, uh, borderline personality disorder, I'm BPD.
Hmm.
We have these kind of things. It's like, I need to put the label, because it sort of, it saves us the time and energy to actually get to know an individual story.
Yeah, and when you're working with a social diagnosis that you make like that, like you said,
Yes.
you
Social
meet somebody.
diagnosis. Write that down, Kimberly.
You meet somebody, you diagnose them, you go on about it, and we do that with spiritual people as well. And even to bring it back, I guess, to like Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you have Ram, who has fought this 10-headed demon for many days and has been chasing after him for the better part of a year, and finally he kills this demon. And Lakshman says, well, what do we do now? His brother says, what do we do now? And Ram says, well, I want you to go to Ravan and I want you to ask him all about how to run a kingdom.
Hmm.
And Lakshman is baffled. He's like, you want me to what? He's like, no, no. He has so much knowledge. He was an expert Brahmin. He was like head of a community. Go find out and research everything he knows about how to run a kingdom. And when
Wow.
Lakshman arrives, at first Ravan won't tell him anything. And Lakshman is offended. He's like, why? He's like, you're too arrogant. And so then finally Ram comes, and Ram and Lakshman sit until Ravan dies, and he tells them everything he knows about how to run a kingdom. And if that isn't an example of two seeming polar opposites, but understanding how to hear from one another, Ram, as the supreme person, decides, no, but this person has a field of knowledge that benefits me. Meanwhile, he's a demon who stole his wife and created a whole issue. He had to kill him, but it still didn't stop him from understanding who Ravan was as a person.
Yeah. Is that in the Ramayana or is that in a commentary somewhere? Where is that?
Yeah, it's in the Ramayana.
That's powerful. So before Ravana died, he was laying there, kind of like Bhishma was laying in the bed of arrows, and they're
Yeah.
just like, go extract what information you can.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta go read that. Jeff said, religion is often described as the art of giving language to hidden things, but there is a beauty and a requirement to be delicate when we give language to phenomenal things as well. This is gorgeous. Yeah, there are some things that don't translate necessarily, and we're trying to, like, because we want to bring everything into our own reference of understanding. Oh, you're this. Okay, I know what that means. Oh, you're this. Okay, I know what that is. As opposed to, like, do I need to fit everything into my own context of understanding? Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We are we're running to the end of our time here today. Kimberly, I want to hear some takeaways. What are we walking away with? Then I want to hear some closing words from Acyuta. And we'll take all that into our day. Let's wrap this up. What are we walking away with?
Put aside the labels to hear out others.
You cut off there, but what I heard was put aside the labels to hear other people's stories. And that's all. Then Kimberly froze, and I think that's perfect in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm coming up with all kinds of stories about what happened. She doesn't like me. She doesn't want to do the service anymore. She's fed up with the podcast. She didn't like this episode. She's rude. I got all kinds of stories about Kimberly. We love you, Kimberly. I think that's perfect in and of itself. I think that's the best takeaway.
Yeah.
Put aside. That's going to be that's the label name of today's episode. Put aside the labels to hear other people's stories.
I love
You
it.
got any final words on that, Acyuta?
Yeah, just, be careful of your social diagnosis.
Be careful of your social diagnosis. That's another title. Diagnose me. What's my social diagnosis? What's a label? Give me some.
Oh my gosh,
What are
you
my
have no
labels?
idea. I spent the better part of this weekend singing your glories to
What?
to everyone I know, including Radhnath Maharaj.
Really? Well, I'll take
I
that.
did.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you something that we're just going over here. I tell you something. I shared this with Ananta Govinda, and he was like, "It kind of makes me a little uncomfortable," but I was like, "Okay, whatever. I'm going to tell you anyways." But because we had a board meeting for the Bhakti Center on Friday. In the board meetings, we speak to the people who, they don't run or manage make major decisions for the Bhakti Center, but they're like our board and as a nonprofit. And we shared like a number of updates and things we're working on. At the end, there was just a number of like exciting things going on that I just wanted to share that weren't necessarily updates or whatever. It was just exciting things that are taking place. One of them was this podcast. One of them was like our Rise platform. And there was just like 4 or 5 bullet points. And one of them was just Cuffy family. I was just like, they're coming for Kirtan. I'm having a podcast with the Acyuta. The Jones boys, Vasan Kesha's releasing a new song. Like,
Yeah.
there's just so much exciting stuff going on and it's so exciting to be serving with them and doing Kirtan with them and doing stuff for them. It's just like uplifting the community and me personally in so many beautiful ways. And just so appreciative for you and that I get to have this podcast with you and that your family comes for Kirtan, that we get to go to India in the fall. And just so excited that your brother wants to do other programs and conversations. It's just really sweet and special. And so I'm just grateful for the connection and love you guys so much.
So much same to all the things.
Same to all the things. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for listening. We love you guys tremendously. And we look forward to being with you again tomorrow. Take care and see you then. Bye-bye.